Thank you so much for coming. We're so excited about this event tonight. Thank you to Judd Foundation for partnering with us on this one. As a little introduction, after the event tonight, we are going to be having, or after the talk, we're going to be having a Q&A. So if anything comes to mind during the course of the conversation, please keep it in there, and then we can call on you, have some audience questions and participation. There are also a few copies of the book that the Judd Foundation has provided to look through this evening. They have a sticker on the back, so that's how they're differentiated from ones that you may have purchased. So if there's a specific work that's referenced or anything, feel free to flip through those to find a visual to match. What else? Also after the event, there will be a signing behind this screen up here to sign any copies you may want. There are more available for purchase downstairs at the register. There's also a bar, so get a drink, come hang out, etc. As a way of introduction, tonight we are joined by Flavin. Flavin Judd is Artistic Director of Judd Foundation and the son of Donald Judd. He has designed architectural spaces in the United States and Europe. He is co-designer and co-editor of Donald Judd Writings, Donald Judd Interviews, and Donald Judd Spaces. He is also co-designer of Donald Judd Artwork, 1980, and Donald Judd Artworks, 1970 to 1994. Rainer is president of Judd Foundation and the daughter of Donald Judd. She co-directed the film Marfa Voices, a documentary which portrays an intimate view of Judd and Marfa. She recently co-directed 14 short film portraits of Judd Spaces for the Foundation on Bloomberg Connects. She is co-editor of Donald Judd Spaces. And tonight they are in conversation with Mahfuz Sultan, who is an architect, director, and writer based in New York City. His writings have appeared in numerous publications, including Art Papers, Harvard Design Magazine, Kaleidoscope, Pinup, 032C, which is, I think, the right way to say that, and where he is currently a contributing editor. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to all of our conversationalists tonight. I hope you enjoy.
Where are we going to start with? All of us, three of us, seem to have been raised in bookstores.
Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty good place to
Not
start.
the same one.
What bookstores were you raised in?
Spring Street Books.
Spring Street Books.
It's no longer there. What, it's a pizzeria now or something?
What about you?
A variety of bookstores. I guess we were just talking about how my parents used to leave me in Barnes and Noble, and then go do other things.
Here. Yeah, that's all right. We have to turn the mics down for the screeching thing, so if you guys can project a little,
Sure.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, it's on.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We were just talking about how my parents used to leave me in Barnes and Noble for several hours. But yeah, I grew up in a lot of different bookstores. Maybe this is a good segue into the book. As I'm sure many of you know, Flavin and Rainer are both co-designers of this book alongside Michael Dyer, I believe, who is somewhere here. Awesome. And also the photo editors. So I thought a good way to begin would be to talk about process, how you started on the book, literally. Yeah, what that was like, et cetera, collaborating.
We went through a lot of photos. And so everything's digital now, right? Which is, I don't know, good and bad, but it meant that we went through folders and I marked, right?
You were blue. You were blue.
I marked preferred photos, Rainer marked preferred photos, and then Mike was the king who could decide yay or nay, so.
I guess it started with most of the photos that we both liked.
Was there any like system?
Yeah.
You have landscapes in there. You have gardens. You have...
We were both pretty familiar with they're like the good old photos that we loved that we never had a purpose for or a moment for. but it was an opportunity to look into photos that we maybe hadn't looked at that much before, contact sheets. And also at Judd Foundation Archive has the archives of some really amazing people like Jamie Deering, who worked with our dad. So a lot of black and whites and color actually are by him. And then Robert Wilson, who's right here, also took photos that we used in here. But really the structure helped. The structure that, I believe New York, Texas Marfa, and then Texas Ranches. So there were 3 sections. And then boom, 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 starting to focus on spaces within. And then within the spaces, there's historic and contemporary.
And I feel like last week we had a conversation, I think, about working on books in kind of a, for lack of a better way of putting it, like almost like a chance-based approach, or like a process-based approach, where you weren't sure over the length of over the process, you weren't actually sure where you were going to end up. I was kind of hoping you guys could speak a little bit to some of the details of that process.
Do you ever know where you're going? No. We didn't have very many rules, so we had, the basic thing was have each Judd Foundation space go through the photos, find the best ones, and drive Mike crazy. So that's what we did. And the photos could have been from any time, any format, any graininess. It didn't matter as long as we liked them in some way. So it was pretty simple.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to be comfortable with awkward stages. You gotta have a big appetite for having not, so it's, you go and you go and you go and you gotta know that you're gonna hear like ding at some point, but you won't know what's going to get you to that singing moment. Sometimes it'll just pop up one day when you finally get those last 2 or 3 changes. So we were awkward for quite a while. I don't know if I'm gonna
Still green? Oh, it's still on. Okay.
And do you think of it now in hindsight as a book of photography, as a book of architectural photography? I mean, I noticed the plans that are distributed throughout it, but obviously the spaces feel very lived in. They're like photographed in a way that's very different from, I think, like the genre of like publication that this participates in. You know, light on text, lots of sort of images, austere images, absence of captions.
This does fit in with the genre, or no?
Does it? It was a question for you.
I don't know what genre it's in, so it wasn't a problem.
Really, it wasn't.
We went from the other way.
Mike?
We have spaces. We want to book on spaces. Lots of as many photos as we wanted. And if you want to find out what Don said about the spaces, well, we have a book for that. It's another book. So for sure.
there are a few essays in there.
There are.
But yeah, I think the main thing is to be really picky about photos.
So let's talk about one. Let's talk about this one. Remember we were talking about this photo last weekend. A part of the reason why I'm kind of calling it out.
The one on the right.
Yeah, the one on the right is because typically in books of, let's say, architectural photography, there is a tendency to take very kind of austere, clean kind of images that are supposed to be like that are supposed to represent the aspirations of the space. But a lot of these photos, like that photo, have things like clothing, people, wine, food, and so, yeah, I suppose I want to pick your brain about that, about how much like representing a form of life was important to you, your lives, his life, etc.
There's another good photo for that.
Go, let's do it.
The thing to remember about the Judd Foundation spaces is they're all one big house. So we have a whole building that's the art studio. We have a building that is the architecture studio. We have a building for the ranches. So despite the fact that they're separate buildings, they're all connected as one living space. Because you could do that in Marfa. And Don just happened to, in the late 80s, things were extremely cheap. And it was actually a way of saving the buildings. So it's a house. That's why it doesn't, I guess, I don't know, I don't look at architecture books that much, but it's why it maybe doesn't look like that, because it's not. This is a shot of the elevator at Spring Street around like the early 80s. So you can see that it's clearly like almost like a moving office, and Spring Street is 5 floors up and 2 down. So the elevator was just Don's way of like obviously getting up and down.
Well, it was an office, mobile office.
And then,
And also, I don't think any of these spaces are new construction, so I don't know, nobody sent us a memo about architecture books or how they're done, so we didn't read a memo.
yeah, no. I wasn't implying that you guys were following a formula in the making of this book. I was saying that this book is really cool to me because it seems to depart from like more kind of banal, boring ways of photographing and representing architecture.
And also because I think our parents were super involved with historic preservation, the opportunities to show the spaces over time was really exciting. And I don't know that when we started, we were sure we could accomplish that or do that. Didn't know how much the historic photos would work out. But I'm glad that they're in there and that they did work out.
Absolutely. And so, in the making of these spaces, how clear was the line between, or sort of looking for Don, how clear was the line between placemaking, living his life in these spaces, and also the making of his art?
It was all the same.
It was all just one continuous process.
That's, for instance, there are, maybe in the book, but if you go down to Marfa, there are clearly spaces that are part of the studio that are full of art.
Mm-hmm.
They also have benches and sometimes beds.
Mm-hmm.
And for Don, there's a space called the studio where maybe you're actually like, dealing with the mechanics of it, but it all moves around and it's all related and it's all together. So there are beds in the studios in case you fall asleep and still want to look at the piece you were thinking about 2 hours later.
I think most artists have a place to sleep in their studio.
For sure. And then what about transients? Like the space is changing, work going out to shows, things disappearing.
They did a lot, but I mean, especially in New York, Spring Street, stuff's going all in and out all the time. Stuff's coming from Europe and then going to Texas. So the Spring Street you see now is basically a frozen 1994 version of Spring Street. If you had gone there in, 1985, it would have looked a lot different. So, but we don't want to like massage it to maybe make a variation of something. So.
But there are spaces that were really consistent. The east building at the block, pretty consistent from 74, 75. But then if you go to the west building, the north space used to be a studio and it was turned into a second library space. I don't know how to hold the mic. So we actually showed that.
Jiggle it.
Jiggle it? We actually showed the old print studios, art studio. It was in the north space of the west building. And then I don't know if people can keep track of that in what we explained and said. But that was probably the biggest space change because he bought a building that is also in this book to move the studio to.
And then what about, I guess I'm still thinking about transients. What about visitors? Like, how populous was the place? When you were growing up there, people coming in and out?
Just his friends.
Just his friends?
There was nobody like, oh, I'm gonna bring somebody through that without, I mean, he just brought people through.
The occasional art dealer who bothered to come to Marfa, but also you have to remember that Don had 40 people working for him just for construction. So while he didn't get to really build a building from scratch, we have 20 buildings in Marfa, so he was very busy, mostly towards the end. So there were a lot of people going in and out, and a lot of staff and friends, local friends, and the occasional crazy person from New York or something.
Or Germany or Japan. Yeah, there were visitors and collectors, and particularly once the annual party started happening in '86. Yeah, people from the Netherlands.
Was it important to you guys to sort of represent, in some way represent that, like the culture of the spaces and the working spaces? I mean, there's a lot of food and drink. There are a lot of like things that are implied also. In
Yeah,
the space.
gotta have food and drink.
But if you have, for instance, we have, what do we have? We have red chilies hanging from the ceiling in the block in Marfa, and those are from 1993, so we didn't add them. So whatever you see there was there.
Yeah, but there are some historic photos of the garden harvest. I think you're talking about the Loretta Venturelli photo of the garden harvest.
We can't represent in the book how many damn zucchinis we had to eat from that garden. It would be impossible.
And the cats are no longer there. But we do keep the garden going, the vegetable garden.
And how important was landscaping and farming and these kinds of things to the process down there, to the life down there? I'm sorry.
Well, the garden was pretty important to our dad. I think one of his favorite people, this is my opinion, one of his favorite people was his grandmother, who I never got to meet. You maybe we did get to meet her, Oni. And he spent summers with her on her farm. And somebody should write an essay about just like how much of a farmer he was in his heart and blood. And also there was a move of his parents away from that history and background. A kind of wanting to eat really good eggs from Mr. Cooper the Eggman, but wanting to have a white carpet and not have dirt in the house. So I think our dad kind of embraced the grandmother more than his parents in his lifestyle choices.
It's funny, Mike. You know, it's funny, as I was going through the essays and texts in here, I noticed that there was certainly a hesitation on Don's part to refer to himself as an architect or as someone that was necessarily making architecture. Refer to things as kind of aspiring to be architecture or being suggestive of architecture. But obviously he had an office, and as you pointed out, he had a lot of people that worked for him. And did he conceive of himself as an architect?
One of the things we have in Marfa is a poster that is the identity card of the Corbusier's. And the reason it is there is because it's Corbusier's passport or French identity card, whatever it was. The reason it's there because under the entry of what do you call it?
Occupation.
Yeah, occupation. My French and my English get mixed up.
Tell us in French.
That doesn't help. Trust me. It says écrivain, which is writer, because he could not declare himself as an architect. So of course Don was like, well, that's great. I need that. We have no other posters of somebody's face, 2 feet tall, but we have that because he couldn't declare himself an architect.
This is
So yes, he felt that his ancestors, the close ancestors, meaning like his
grandfather.
his grandfather and his great grandfathers, since they were Midwest farmers, they all built their houses and barns and everything, and that's just as much architecture as anything else. So
He listed them as cabinet makers on the window of the architecture office building. Clarence, Judd, and Yingling too, I think. Forget Grace Yingling.
It's a long name, yeah.
There's a lot of
them. There are a lot of them.
Cabinet makers. But wait, I just had a brief tangent that the FBI came in and stole that poster
It
from
was
Don.
intercepted in shipping from Europe. It disappeared.
Oh.
Nobody knew where it was. And then it was returned 6 months later with a sticker on it that said FBI evidence. And it's because one of the local Marfa people had called the FBI saying that there were satanic communists behind the 9-foot adobe wall, and could you please do something about it?
Where do we go from there?
What about bookmaking? I mean, I know that there were a lot of books down there, and it's in the photography. But how much?
13,005.
13,000. Jeez. But how much was bookmaking a part of his process? Not literally. I mean, not by hand. But I'm just curious.
Regular activity.
I mean, the first books are in '75 for the writing, the critic writings, and also the Basel drawing catalog. And there are little catalogs before that, but they're a little shaky. But yeah, he writes more and more to the 80s, and the first writings book came out in '86 via Eindhoven. Anyway, so yes, and only later was the design of books come into it when he designed the paper cover for the furniture catalog. Before that, he was not really involved in the design, so I think that was like a nice thing he got to do, but there would have been more books, obviously.
But for those who were just born, I should mention that magazines and newspapers were also really, the art magazines are the reason that David Novros, who's an artist, moved to New York City from California. He was reading about my dad and other artists and reading my dad's writings and was like, that's where I'm going. I'm going where that action is happening. But in terms of Don writing, he might write something that would be in a magazine, and that would be a good place for that piece of writing to go to. But then at the same time, the spaces themselves were Architecture Digest, House and Garden. There was, it seems like always a magazine article in the works, and really good or great photographers down, because magazines were such a basic way of communicating and keeping culture in dialogue.
Did he change much for the photos? I'm just curious. Nothing?
Are you kidding? It's like, there it is.
The spaces?
Yeah, in the spaces
No,
when they were
nothing.
before they were being photographed.
No.
Yeah, like last week, our place is being it's going to be
Are you thinking
rented.
about whether to clean before a photo?
No, bear with me. There's our space is going to be rented out in the summer, and we've been leaving, and then the broker goes in when we leave, and my partner Chloe and I are very, very specific about, we have like a very kind of, we're like super specific about how we like lay things out and how objects float in space and whatever, and then each time we get back and the broker has changed something like super dramatically, right? Like there's a complete disconnect between whatever it is we think we're doing and whatever it is they think they need to do to get the space rented. And so I thought about that, or I was thinking about that as I was walking over here, and about the photos and like the degree to which they like, the degree to which they like show or like illustrate the way they were actually being used. And so, anyways, I'm kind of babbling. There's not a question at the end of this.
I could think of if somebody put a metal Lenny Judd bookcase up against the wall so that it was touching, like, I don't know, when Dawn was out or when we were out. Like, there are certain things that, or even Swedish furniture from the 1800s, which there are a lot in the spaces. There's a certain way that furniture exists in the spaces, which gives them space around them. I can't think of, maybe when we were kids, the chairs that we used for bedside tables were up against the wall, but it was rare or a bed in a nook would be up against the wall. But for the most part, there was a lot of free floating of furniture, similar to a lot floor pieces, Judd art floating in space. So I can see if somebody came in and, started moving things around, there would be an undoing.
And was there a lot of music at all in these spaces? I don't know. I've never heard much about Dawn and music.
Very loud.
Very loud. What kind of music?
Mostly classical. He had one Charlie Parker record. And I asked him once, like, where did you get this? Like, why do you, because I was into Charlie Parker at the time. And he's like, I don't know, somebody gave it to me, but I don't understand it at all. He listened to it like once.
But he had the reel-to-reel, and that was Bob Dylan, Beatles, and where did Charlie's a good old man.
Lead Belly.
Oh, Lead Belly.
And did any of it? Do you think any of it impacted how he designed, how he worked?
No, but I mean
No.
the structure of Bach's fugues is evident, so I think that he liked that a lot. I don't think it informed him, but it's an affinity.
What you mean, like the like 1 3 2 3, like the
contrapuntal
ratio.
things that go forward and backwards the other way at the same time. It's like certainly a Judd thing, but
Cool.
Yeah, he liked to think about math. Actually, if you watch one of the Bloomberg shorts, there's a whole little, maybe it's the Northeast studio, where he talks about math, and that relates to music.
I had a question about the ranch houses. They're obviously like less transformed than I think some of the other spaces, because I presume there was a desire not to sort of like disrupt the land. And
yes and no.
yes and no.
Depends on which one you're talking about. They're all from different times. So first one is 76, the second one is 82, and the last one's 88. And the more recent you get, the much more transformed they are. So you've got to come and see.
I know. I haven't been to Marfa, by the way. No, but I guess my question about it was, I found in my reading that as of when he commenced, I guess, work on the ranch houses, I think discussions about the land and about architecture tended to get a little bit more mystical and a little bit more spiritual. And last week we were having a conversation about space and outer space, and I think I wanted to just prompt you guys to talk a little bit about the landscape in West Texas, a little bit about the landscape around the ranch houses, and maybe his relationship to landscape, because I think photography of the landscape is very prominent in this book.
So these photos of the landscape are in a little part of West Texas called the Chenanny Mountains, and it's down a ranch road called 2810, but don't really tell everybody about it because the tarmac ends and then it's a little dirt road. Most people's cars can't go down there anyway. But the thing that is surprising when you go down there, particularly for New Yorkers or people who live in cities, is that it's incredibly empty in West Texas, the Tri-County area that is pretty exquisite, even though it's overgrazed, it's not tilled, if you know what I mean. It's not industrial for the most part. And the Tri-County area is the size of Belgium with only 18,000 people. So when you wonder like, oh, people arrive and they're like, why does it feel so different? And I want to say, because there are more cows than there are people. And Chenanny Mountains is particularly isolated, quiet part of that Tri-County area. It's not perfect. There's all sorts of challenges there. The one of the largest oil and gas areas is just north of us in the Permian Basin. So it's a little like heaven, very large heaven next to a very large hell. And Don was vocal and passionate about land. He was of the personality type or the generation, or maybe both, that thought if you care about something, you just need to buy it. And as one of his lawyers.
And buy more of it in case of land.
And more, and more. You can kind of, you can get that disease out there. But if you, as Carl Ryan would say, a Texas lawyer, he'd say, Don just, wanted to buy what he could see, and then what he could see, and then what he could see, and then he just, ready to stop. But wow, that's like a whole other conversation. The land in West Texas is part of the Chihuahuan Desert, and it's exquisite. It's Chihuahuan Desert is 2/3 in Mexico. And I don't know, do you want to say anything about Don and land?
His basic premise was don't mess it up. The desert is really fragile. Like if you make a road, it'll be there for 2,000 years, whether you drive on it or not. So while the ranch houses get more complex as he gets them, even the late one, Las Casas, he's not building anything in a kind of an undisturbed area. He's already building where there are already stuff and houses and things like that.
He was very interested in people only building on disturbed land. It's a good motto to live by. Spread the word.
Sure. So I think it's time to open up to audience questions. We're not going to pass the mic around, so I guess I'll just point. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kind of interested in the relationship back and forth creatively between the times that Donald Joe was at 19th Street and Yayu Kusama was there, and the time that Donald Joe was with Loretta Ventrelli and she was teaching at Columbia, and that work. I was wondering whether there's any kind of back and forth in inspiration either way, because I think she also made a beautiful set of those drawings that were part of the trellis work and in the Morpheus. So I was wondering, how did they influence each other back and forth, if there was?
There's 10 years separating Kusama and Vinciarelli. So Don was at 19th Street until 68, and he met Loretta in 76. But
also one relationship was romantic and one was not.
They still.
I no, yeah, they're actually very far apart. So, but they're both very important, but in different ways. I mean, I think Kusama was extremely important to Don. He got to stuff a lot of phalluses. I mean, that's not something you get to do every day.
He was doing that. He was stuffing.
And he drug a rowboat through the streets of New York with her. I mean, this is good stuff for 1962. But in the same way, meeting Loretta was really good because she was already a practicing architect and had a kind of, you could see from Don's drawings that he has a way of approaching buildings in a kind of abstract way, like, okay, let's make, 4 buildings that face each other, for instance. And Loretta, being maybe Italian, and there's obviously a very long history, had a more kind of, a different view of how to solve problems, and they kind of work together. It was good.
A question. First, thank you for the talk. My question is, each of the spaces, they're introduced with these beautiful plans that have like the art and the scale of furniture drawn in the plan, but there seems to be not an elevation or a section type of drawings in any of the spaces. Is there a specific reason why those are not in the book?
Mike, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so
I'm going to stand up so we can hear you better.
Our goal was to focus mostly just on
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Dyer, the designer.
But there's another really good book that covers all the architectural drawings in which we in fact inherited those plans from, and that one is really comprehensive. So
You have to get that book too?
yeah, we have to buy another book. But it was we privileged the photography and the photographic experience over a purely architectural experience, and so the plans are just to orient the space.
And actually, the exterior photos are thought of in an elevation type of way. I think each building has a
Flat.
yeah. At the last minute, some good sunsets were created at a very high expense for us.
I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time at the house in Marfa, and one of the things is so crazy, but one of the things that really stayed with me were things like the pantry and like other things that were so completely consistent with this holistic approach to space and the way that you live in a space and the way sort of humans interact with space in a very kind of human way, which is what you're talking about with the messy pictures. And so I'm really curious about at what point are you as children aware of the spaces being like places, or reflections of that kind of rigor, or are you just like, this is my house and this is regular? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you?
I thought everybody else was weird. I thought our house was normal. So there you go.
That makes sense to me, actually.
I had some major campaigns as a 6-year-old. One of them was to have a closet, and then he did design closets for us. And I wanted a lawn, which is a really big deal, which I don't. I mean, I do still like grasses, but not that kind of lawn. And so and plum trees, and those are all at the block closet lawn. And I think we wanted desks, which is why the desks, or we needed desks. Yeah. Wasn't one of the main.
But if you went to any loft in New York in the 70s, it would look more or less like Spring Street. So this was much more prevalent than it might seem now. I mean, but the whole area, the lawyers moved in, and that's the end. So
Yeah, Giorgio DeLuca talks about, I think in our oral history project, about like the new people, they like buy these beautiful loft buildings and they lower the ceilings. They don't really know how to live in loft spaces or appreciate them. They could have just, buy a box.
Thank you for your question. Made me think of my question. As far as being siblings and like writing on like memories and reflecting, do you guys ever have different perceptions of the same moments, and do they like show up in the writing?
I don't think we asked. I don't know.
Do we have different perceptions of our dad, of what our dad wrote?
No, of him and like moments together that you reflect on. Like,
It's just that Flavin's memory kicked in earlier than mine. He's older than me, so he remembers some things that I don't remember.
We might have organized it so we never remember the same thing. It's like a self-defense device. I don't know.
Do you remember the flood? The arroyo?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Well, there's 2 floods, actually.
Sorry. One of the things that struck me when I went to the ranches was, Don was very specific and, didn't build anything that wasn't already on disturbed land. But it was also like his pragmatism of like the number of border patrol, like spray painted on the bunkhouse. And I wonder what you guys think about the situation today and how it impacted 25 years ago when he was built, tricking out Las Casas because it's so close to the border.
Are you talking about the border issues?
Well, sort of border issues, but how he dealt with that, because it seems like when you read the book, it's all domestic and specific, but also he was really practical. And I don't think, people know that about him.
I think they're very related, to be practical and to be domestic and to solve problems and to build your own building and design architecture and make your own art because you can't find that you like, and to make buildings that you have to make your own buildings because you can't find buildings you like. It's all the same. And yes, you might have to write the Border Patrol's number on the wall because you might have to call them. Sorry, by the way, you call the Border Patrol at our ranches because sometimes people come to the ranch and they need water, and they might need a ride back. Not the ride they want, but sometimes that has to happen.
Yeah, and that's a subject for, I don't think you're asking about, but how the border has changed is also a subject. But I think you just made me think about not everybody likes to be by themselves for weeks on end at a ranch in the middle of nowhere, a few miles from the border, hot. So he had a particular interest in getting time by himself to think and write. I think that maybe it was confusing for a kid, but definitely as I've gotten older, I really appreciate it.
My question is, so the New York space is obviously a fixed space. There's no moving the facade, moving that around. Was there ever a frustration with the limitations of that space, and was that ever a driving factor in what eventuated in Marfa and other areas?
I don't think he ever liked the fire escape at Spring Street.
New York was too small. The building was too small. He joked that since Spring Street, can you open up? Since Spring Street is a right angle, right? You have a short end and you have a long end. He joked that what he could do, since it was cast iron, you could recast the entire facade twice and put them together on the ranch, and you'd have a new building. Anyway, so the answer is New York was too busy, the building was too small, and Marfa.
Anybody on this side?
Yeah, can you talk a bit about how growing up and caring for these spaces shape your own conception of space? Like, how do your own spaces, do they aspire to the same aesthetic, or if not, how do they differ?
It's okay to make a mess because you know how to clean it up.
I think we took two different paths. Rainer bought the original house in Marfa that we moved, not the first one, but one of the main houses we moved to when we were small, and she restored it so it looks almost exactly like the house she moved into when she was 4. Two, sorry. And then while I can pretty much turn any industrial building into some Judd-esque building. That's not what I would normally do, and I'm always trying to mess things up in an interesting way. So, but I think you can't help but be influenced by the spaces you live in. So, and also, not only were we influenced in the space by the spaces we lived in, but we were influenced by a person who was, whose attention to space and detail was, way beyond what is expected of a normal person, especially expected of a normal child. But it worked out.
But just to talk about influences and remembering whoever you spoke about, Liz, about the pantry. So that pantry is all his mother and his grandmother. I mean, that's him. He didn't think, oh, I'm going to put some beans in a jar. And he'd like to get somebody to make pickles, but he wasn't a pickler himself.
But he was a zucchini grower.
He was a zucchini
Par
grower.
excellence.
But it's incredibly linear.
Yeah, and it's beautiful,
Yeah,
jars of
so
food
beautiful.
on a shelf. I think most people like that. No, they do.
We have time for like 2 more questions. Yeah? From anyone.
Parker.
This side is really not holding.
Yeah, you guys. Disappointment.
Are you gonna look down? Oh, there's nobody behind you. Got a question?
Okay, what's the question more of a prompt? Pharmacies. No,
You wanted pharmacies.
Yeah, but that was in the context of corporate America, and we haven't gotten to that subject.
All right, now's the time. It's cat's out of the bag.
What are we talking about?
Blank Street Coffee.
Blank Street. That's right.
Frightens me.
Okay, so I have these two were talking about the corporate takeover of America, right? With some more or less, right?
No small thing.
Right. And that certain coffee companies are everywhere and all the same, and rip-offs of certain spaces and styles and rip-offs of coffee, I suppose.
Or even a smorgasbord of things you think you may have seen somewhere sometime and never wanted to see again.
Exactly.
Together.
So quality control needs to be introduced, and also laws need to be introduced, maybe, so that corporations, large corporations housed in Dallas or some horrible place can't take over the coffee houses in other places.
All right, let's just make a pact.
And I was saying, hold on, this comes to pharmacies, because I was saying that in France, if you have a pharmacy, you have to be the pharmacist running it. Therefore, there are no chain pharmacies. You have to be there to run it. And I think, if you have a coffee shop, you better, you should be there running it.
Yeah, and we also talked about the term brands as trying to get away from the fact that they're profit mongers.
Yeah, I'm totally sitting here trying to unspool all the trains of thought in that conversation.
Did you have something to say about? No, pharmacies was
Pharmacies.
You were really upset about the components of the flowers, I think, in Blank Street Coffee.
No, I think we were just talking about the ubiquity of a certain generic kind of design language that's super heterogeneous. It's different in every case, but you recognize it and it's always the same. And then we were trying to, or I was trying, I guess, to distinguish that from a lot of the specificity in these spaces, how specific and lived and how a part of life.
Yeah, if you have something specific, you have the possibility of a complexity coming out of it. And if you have something general, like certain coffee shops, they're always going to be simplistic and you'll get nothing. So.
And that how you live is actually political, because each of you is very individual for a reason, because it makes your life more fulfilling and will create a very dynamic journey for your life. But if you give in to the folks who make money off of you having no opinion, not wanting anything intuitive that you might get made, that you envision, or you might make yourself, God forbid, you gotta push back.
Don't become a Starbucks coffee shop.
And I think this book and even our journey at Judd Foundation is just a bit of encouraging people to be themselves and take themselves seriously, because actually the world depends on it. If we all, just shut down, there are actual awesome mammals out in the wild who won't have us to make a better world and protect them. That's my.
And on that note, I can't really have anything to that.